If you want to learn, you have to first listen.
Welcome to episode 29 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I am Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do. I want to know how many people, when they're adults buying a notebook, get PTSD as to whether or not college ruled. I want to know what matters to you and why. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player. That means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person deeply interested in a topic is often more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That makes for a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. This time on the podcast, I am joined by musician and all-around wonderful human being, Ellen Angelico. We will be talking about her new documentary podcast, Girl in a Hurry, the Shelly Bush story. It is a podcast about, as you would guess, the singer Shelly Bush, who for the first handful of years that I lived in Nashville was the queen of the Lower Broadway honky-tonk scene. We'll get to Ellen and Shelly in a second, but I just wanted to talk for a second about the plethora of SNL 50th anniversary content that drolled out over the past few weeks, culminating in their special last night as I am recording this on NBC. It really gave my heart for New York a lot of good feelings, and I also just love SNL, even when it's not in a time that everybody loves. It is an incredible thing that is put on by people in just a few days, and it happens live, and I think that's a massive accomplishment every time it airs, just for the fact that they get it done. There are so many alternate timelines in which pretty much every SNL episode has something go terribly wrong and the whole thing just doesn't air. Why that matters here and now, though, is because stick around for the end music if you've heard it before or if you've never heard it before as repeat listeners. But the inspiration for that track was to be a tribute to the end music of SNL, just with a big screaming guitar played by my good buddy John Shaw, rather than a saxophone. So in honor of the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, it is worth dedicating the playing of that outro on this episode to them and all they've accomplished. I've known Ellen Angelico for a pretty long time. She also went to Berklee College of Music a couple of years behind me. We had some mutual friends, which is how we first met. And then I got to know her a tiny bit better when she came on to the Berklee Internet Radio Network student-run station, where I was in some management position at the time. Then, when she moved to Nashville a few years behind me, I started seeing her around, and it was just kind of like, oh, hello, friend. We played together a little bit downtown in Nashville. Our last gig together, I think we established in the course of the conversation you're about to hear, was about 10 years ago, which is also right around the same time as the passing of Shelly Bush, the subject of Ellen's podcast, Girl in a Hurry. Ellen played pretty extensively with Shelly for a while in the last few years of Shelly's life, and Ellen credits a lot of her path forward as being due to the influence of Shelly in her life. And that is why she dove in and created this podcast. I myself played a handful of gigs with Shelly a longer time ago than since Ellen and I played gigs together. And most of that came because I knew all the girl songs. I was kind of only playing with female artists at that point. And at that time especially, it was hard to find players that knew the girl songs. Female country songs have a lot more chord changes, more intricacies normally, and you've really got to know them to be able to play them. So for a while there, and maybe still to some degree, if you knew how to play those songs, you were going to work. And so even though Shelly was known for having an all-female band, she worked a ton, and there were always just spots that would pop up to sub in for. And so I did that probably a half dozen times over the course of maybe 6 months back in the early 2010s. Now, I had heard the entirety of Girl in a Hurry before Ellen and I sat down for this discussion, so we talk a lot about what is in there. I do not think it is a prerequisite for you to have listened to it. To hear this discussion, we veer off into some pretty universal and general things based off of things that happened in Shelly's life and the way that we view them, the way that we view music, all kinds of stuff. There's great value in here. If you want to go listen to some of it before you hear us talk, you are welcome to and encouraged to probably do some of that. It would give you some interesting perspective on it. If you heard all of it, that's great. If you came here because you have heard all of it, and this is sort of an enrichment episode for those who popped over based on some cross-promotion of me and Ellen, then I'm excited for you to hear it. If you haven't heard any of it, I still think you're going to have a great time. But I am about to play the trailer for Girl in a Hurry just so you get a little bit of the flavor of it. It's only a minute long, and then we're going to head into that discussion. So here's that trailer, and then you will hear my talk with Ellen Angelico.
How do you measure success in country music? Is it the CMA awards you win, or is it the gigs at topless tricycle races you survive?
Now, thankfully, where we were, I think clothing was required. But when we get to the very front gate, there's two dudes standing there. Long Dong Silver.
We're gonna rock this city, then we're gonna roll on down the road.
My name is Ellen Angelico. I'm a session musician in Nashville, and I've played gigs with big stars and grizzled honky-tonkers. But no artist has meant more to me than Shelly Bush, the most influential woman in country music you've never heard of.
Shelly Bush should go down in history as the best girl singer in Nashville.
Her powerful voice could shake the rafters.
I tell you, I thought the roof was coming off church.
But chasing stardom meant navigating a cutthroat music industry, and Shelly was hell on wheels.
She was a horrible driver.
Her hustle was legendary.
They'd be like, well, we don't have music on Thursdays. And she'd go, well, what about a Wednesday? Or what about this thing? She just wouldn't take no.
This isn't just Shelly's story. It's the story of everyone who ever moved to Nashville with a dream. Look, history may be written by the victors, but there's a kind of victory that matters more than having a Wikipedia page. This is Girl in a Hurry, the Shelly Bush story. Visit us at girlinahurry.com for details.
I'm a girl in a hurry, so make up your mind. If you don't know what you want, I'll leave you behind. Life's too short and there's no time to worry. If you're gonna break my heart, make it fast. I'm a girl in a hurry. I'm a girl.
Just nice to talk.
I was saying about liking doing this interview style podcast, but I enjoyed your investigative reporting. It made me think of Serial in all the best ways. Like Serial was the first podcast, that ever really blew up to a broader consciousness.
Yeah.
And it feels like that. And some of this is about planning, right? Like as I'm trying to build this podcast into a strong regular listenership, to do occasional documentary style things that require more digging and
it's so much work. I don't recommend it.
I bet.
I mean, can I express an anxiety about that?
Yeah, please do.
I'm not a reporter or a journalist, and so
Sure.
I don't know that world. I don't know the ethics of that. There's so much of me in this.
Well, there is, which so much of the Shelly thing has, because you were personally
right
involved. It's easier to do that. I think
Right.
you would have to just like
Yeah.
be so much more disclaimer forward. You were saying about your
It showed me
anxieties.
how much of history is in who tells it. And
Yeah.
like this, I don't know if this is Shelley's story the way that Shelley would tell it.
Up front, I will say, like I didn't know Shelly well. I played probably 7 or 8 gigs with her in like 2011, 2012.
That's awesome.
And the reason I was getting called is at that point, I had only played with girls. So I knew all the girl songs. I didn't know any dude songs. Very few or only the ones that like randomly crossed over. And so I would get a lot of work that way
yeah.
just by being like, oh, call Matt. He knows all the girl songs because there are so many people who don't,
Right.
you know?
Right.
That is like a hard thing to do is find people that know all those.
Especially back then.
Yeah, especially 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And so that was a thing. So there were so many things that in listening to it, I found, I was like, oh yeah, I know that. Like, I know this thing. And,
Yeah.
But also things that were never going to be the same, like road stories about like
Oh,
people
yeah.
being like out there. Those had none of my experience in them
Right.
because they were just like half a dozen gigs, a couple at Second Fiddle, a couple at the Wheel,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep. R.I.P.
yep, I think one at like Legends.
Yeah. What did you think of Shelley when you met her?
You
If you don't mind my asking.
No. I tried to think about this as I was listening to the show because I did finish the whole thing.
Oh, wow. Thanks.
Yeah.
You didn't even, I wasn't expecting that. That's
oh,
cool.
no. Well, one, it was compelling.
Thanks.
And two, it also wasn't as long as I thought it was. Like once I actually looked at the times when I sat down to do it, I was like, oh, this is an easily achievable binge. Also, I do like being as prepared as possible for these.
Who,
so,
you?
yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm the guy with the gigantic chart folder.
Yeah.
Preparation.
Not your thing, preparation.
Not at all.
Oh my God.
I mean this in the most positive way, but Shelley was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like she was a force, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that was like a thing. But luckily, I think that a lot of the women who played Broadway at that time, because there weren't a ton of them, were all at that time, and they still are personally, strong women. There weren't a lot of artists on Broadway at the time that were like weak at that. Age varied, but they knew what was up.
Yeah, they knew themselves.
Yeah, they knew themselves, and they also knew what music was like, what the music industry was like, how things worked.
Yeah.
And so everybody was very aware. Do you remember Brandy Thornton at all?
Bass player?
No, she was an artist. That's who I like came up playing with. She hasn't played in town at all since like 2015. They had a baby and their son died.
Oh, gosh.
And after that, she never played again.
Ugh, I hate that.
She was incredible. But she was one of the ones, like her and Shelley were kind of the two, like, if you're going to go see a woman sing on Broadway, those are the ones you want to go see.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same thing where it's like, they're very like big personalities, but in a good way,
Yeah.
And that is how I would say that Shelley was like, just the whole thing that you describe, overwhelming drive kind of thing, is so right. Like that is the thing that I felt in listening to the podcast, like memories coming back about that.
Yeah.
About being like, oh yeah, that's right. She was like, take no prisoners to achieve
Right.
the thing.
Right. Did you ever play with her when she would leave her Mustang or her van double parked on Broadway during the gig? I didn't even talk about that in the podcast.
No.
I just thought about it now, but it's like, sometimes it was just like, I don't have time to park.
Yeah.
So we're going to put this here and leave the flashers on.
Yeah.
And deal with it if I get a cop coming up to me.
That's right. And at that time, you could still park on Broadway
Right.
for the most part. And so at least it wasn't so out of order. I played with her mostly with Anita on drums. I think I only did one with Karen D playing drums. And so, but I remember the one with Karen, like Karen would be like looking out and just like, I think there was a time that like she was going to get a ticket and Karen had to be like, Shelly,
Incredible.
there's a cop by your car. And she would like run off and just leave it for a 5-minute solo.
There were a couple people. Anita is one. Suzanne Rohr is another.
I haven't thought about Suzanne Rohr in a long time.
Jet King is another that I contacted and was in touch with, but wasn't able to get interviews nailed down in time. But it just speaks to how big of a presence she was downtown, because there were so many people.
No, she was legitimately the queen of Broadway. Like, that is not hyperbole. Like,
Right.
in terms of just like presence, that she was it in that time, you know, that 2000-ish thing. Anyway, so for people listening to have a good understanding, so tell me about like doing the podcast and why Shelly.
You know, I wonder if I knew why, if I would have done it still. The first thing is that I realized it was the 10th anniversary of her passing.
Sure, yeah.
This coming Valentine's Day.
And it will come out, the show will come out on the anniversary of her passing. Yeah.
And I kind of couldn't believe that it had been 10 years. I couldn't believe it. It put my whole career in perspective.
Yeah.
And it made me realize how not old I am, because I still think I'm a young person, but how much experience I have and how many people I've met and how many stories there are like Shelly's of people who wanted to be huge and weren't.
Yeah.
And I thought that there's a little bit of that in everybody. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people who move to Nashville are ambitious about their careers and want to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And why that does or doesn't happen is sometimes for complicated reasons that can be out of your control.
Mostly
Mostly out of your control. Yeah.
And yeah, you could do, or someone could do, an entire anthology podcast dedicated to tons of those people.
Yeah.
Like unheralded people that were close to a thing or really working for a thing. I have started to say maybe in the past 5 years that I am now old enough and have been here long enough to start thinking about when different artists or bands were supposed to be a thing and then didn't happen.
Yes.
Like they were 10%, away from clicking and it didn't happen or whatever. Someone like the band Gypsy.
Oh, yeah.
When Gypsy was a huge thing. I thought of that one because so much of the Shelly thing is Layla's.
Yep.
And, they played at Layla's a ton and it was always packed when they did and they were supposed to be the next thing and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Just whatever things, it's life and people and it's hard to do, especially when you're a group of people, more than just one person.
Right.
It's hard to like keep that moving.
And they've all gone on to have incredible careers and they're amazing people and amazing musicians.
That's right.
It's wild to think that caliber of talent isn't what breaks you through.
Yeah.
Because there is, I don't know. I mean, when I see them play still, I'm just like, these are some of the best musicians I know.
Yeah. What's the fiddle player's name? I can't
Lily.
Yeah. And I mean, she's doing the Post Malone gig.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
She's playing
that.
fiddle for Post Malone and she's so great.
She's had a remarkable solo career.
Yep.
And then still just shows up at D's.
Yep.
They all do.
Yeah.
And they're amazing and they inspire me. And that's like, you think of how close they got compared to somebody like Shelly.
Yeah.
It just, the further you get down the pyramid, the more people there are.
It's true. I think Shelly, on the whole, was both 10 years too early and 10 years too late.
Yeah.
Like for what her thing was, had passed by the time she was really gunning.
Right.
And then would have in some way come back around later.
Yeah. There's another band. Do you know the band Wild Rose?
Yeah.
90s female country band, incredible players. Again, like the Rishis, they have gone on to have impressive careers, all of them. But the thing that the band that they made together was, it predated the Dixie Chicks. It predated Shadazy. It predated an all-women country act going mainstream.
Yeah.
But it's so good. Their records are amazing. Even if Spotify does confuse it with melodic metal. There's some other band called Wild Rose and it is very confusing to find on Spotify.
I don't know how much you read like industry news. I see stats come up from like Hypebot sometimes about how many tracks get uploaded every week.
Oh, they'll just let anybody.
Services. Yeah, there's no barrier to entry, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
all those things are good for some people and bad for others.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that Shelly would have been closer.
Do you think so?
I think maybe, I remember a bunch of her records.
Yeah.
And they sounded really good.
Mm-hmm.
They were well funded
Right.
by, what's his face?
Garnet.
Garnet, yeah. That's a thing too, is like everybody that comes to town learns like it costs a lot to make it happen.
Yeah.
Because we're both at an age where it's like you realize money moves things. Like
Right.
it sadly is so often all about the money. There are some times that I think that like the mixing could have been a little better. Like if they had been able to be connected to like a higher tier like mix engineer,
Yeah.
those records would sound like really banging.
Mhm.
They sound just a little like thin and narrow sometimes. For me, you need to play it next to things that are on the radio and stuff like that, and see how they like sit, because
Yeah.
that's a big part of how radio and stuff chooses to do those things,
Yeah.
is like, do they sonically stand up to what they're going to be adjacent to?
Even if Shelly had that going for her,
Mhm.
do you think that I don't want to get too dark, but
Sure.
do you think that the industry was ready for her? Like that they could have seen success for someone who had an all-female band that wasn't necessarily all young hotties? And
I thought it was interesting that and insightful that using an all-female band was a big part of her. And I use this word in a professional wrestling way, not like a bad way. I'm a big professional wrestling person. Was part of her gimmick.
right.
That was the thing. But I thought it was insightful that you like pointed out that it didn't necessarily seem like she was trying to empower women.
Right.
It was just a thing
It was a
that
gimmick.
set her apart.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily altruistic.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And so I think that someone would have talked her out of it. If, say, Big Machine had said, we are interested in signing, at least to develop, Shelly Bush, but like, we're not going to do like this band. Like, you can't take these people with you. And again, you said you don't want to like have it be like dark. And this is like a unfortunate thought. And you know her exceptionally better than I did. So I'm speculating here. But based on what my knowledge is, and also all the things you present in the podcast, I think that she would have been willing to say, okay,
Yeah.
and end up with a band of dudes who were all, guys who'd played elsewhere and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I think she would have had no problem doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think the thing that I think she also could have managed to get signed despite her disabilities, which were Tourette's and what is the muscle thing?
Well, she had a congenital disability. It, not to just harp on PC language, but in the previous, in earlier years, it might have been called a birth defect. It just was it was a difference in her musculature that she was born with.
You talk on the podcast a bunch about how she worked very hard to hide those things. I think the Tourette's thing she did a very good job of, but I would say like if you played on Broadway a lot, you knew that she had a walking thing, and like she wouldn't talk about it, but it was kind of like unhideable in a way.
Right.
And again, not in a negative way, but it's taking her on as a product of the actual country music industry. It wouldn't have been hideable. Like it would have had to be out there that that's a thing.
Right.
I mentioned, and we'll see what makes it from our like casual, like getting into this. I'm that guy, but I said to you just before that I compared your show to the way Serial is. And I wondered if you were going to talk about the Tourette's and the congenitive things. And then when you get to it in like episode 4, I was like, oh, that's cool that you like wait to like introduce this thing. That is a good narrative podcast creation thing, that you took this thing that is a big part of Shelly and you waited until the second half to introduce it. And it's like, oh, here's a wrinkle.
Yeah. It was a struggle because, like you said, it wasn't public information.
Yeah.
You were down there. You saw the way that Shelly looked. Her disability was visible, but it wasn't public knowledge because she didn't talk about it.
Right.
But among us downtown, we all knew we also didn't talk about it because clearly she wasn't talking about it. So it wasn't territory we were allowed to be in.
And she managed, like, it didn't stop
No, it
her.
certainly didn't.
That's the
slow
thing
her
is
down.
like, it would be different if it was like, you know, Shelly can't walk. We need to, as a band, be like looking out for Shelly about this.
But that's why I struggled whether or not to include it or when to include it, like you said, because if Shelly was still alive telling this story, I don't think that section would be in Shelly's version of Shelly's podcast.
Yeah, you're probably right. And what I think is interesting about the podcast is that people crave, especially now, authenticity and vulnerability. And that perhaps is the fine line that may have crossed over with Shelly as to whether or not she would have been greatly successful or not, is that she portrayed, again, I'll keep it that way, the gimmick that she wanted to portray about who Shelly Bush, the artist and performer, was. And that works in country a lot. There are all kinds of stories about that.
Yeah.
But I think the people who show a vulnerability get a lot of mileage, and she probably, not without a lot of therapy, probably would have, you know, gotten to that place and done something. So it's hard. It's kind of a real Schrodinger Shelly.
She both is and isn't successful until we open the box.
Yep.
Yeah. There's such parallels for anybody who ever tries to get somewhere in the music business. I mean, we're all different in some way, and we can choose to own it, or we can choose to try and brush over our image and try to fit in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see yourself that way, but you are musically adventurous in a way that some bass players are not.
Sure.
You obviously can play songs the way that they go when you are called upon to do so, but you're not afraid of
It's been like 10 years since we played together. I'm so glad that you recognize these things in hindsight.
Well, you're not afraid to play your instrument. You're not afraid to explore your range. You're not afraid to take solos. So many bass players don't feel comfortable taking solos.
I don't anymore. If you're asking me to kind of like just play something groovy over a reasonable set of chord changes, I think that still works.
Interesting. It has been a while since we've played together, and
last time we played together
was it at Honky-Tonk Central?
Yeah, with Trenton Chandler.
What a guy.
Yeah.
What a guy.
That's someone that
do a podcast
could
about
be a
him.
podcast.
Seriously. I would like to think that if you wanted to, that would come back for you.
I think
because
so.
it felt like, at that time, it felt like a part of who you are.
Yep.
The reason I ask this is because I feel this way about my own style. Do you think that the things that make you different have drawn artists to you who are better suited for you and for exploring, as opposed to like cookie cutter formulaic music?
I think that I would say the hallmark of what I do as a bass player is listen to what's going on around me.
Yeah.
We were talking before we got in here about, I was saying about intention in music making and how I believe, and I don't care who hears this show in terms of these things and how it affects people's perception of me for potential work, but that I am fine with commercial music that sounds formulaic or whatever, but you have to be honest about, at least honest with yourself and the people close to you about that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to have a radio hit that sounds like XYZ. And that just don't say you're writing Sweet Baby James.
Right.
Sweet Baby James is the song that I always think of.
Sure.
That is such an incredible song, and it is sort of simplistic in its complexity. It's the same form twice. The chords are incredible. The lyrics are incredible. James's voice and his playing, it's all there.
Yeah.
And it is high art. But people will make something that isn't that, but say that that's what they're doing. And it's like, come on. That
makes me think of Shelly too, because she never made any bones about her intentions. She was like gonna be a star.
Yeah.
That's my plan. I want a record deal.
That's right.
I want to be a big star. And it was never about.
Well, that's what it looked like at the time too. Like her you talk about her influences, like who influenced her, and it was, your Tammy Wynette's, Loretta Lynn's, Reba, and that's sort of the thing. Like, they are driven women and artists, they don't even have to be women, just artists that were driven to seek out exceptional fame and notoriety through the presentation of their work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it makes total sense that that's what she would want to do.
Why do you think people tell that other story about themselves when if they were being honest about it, it's just naked ambition, it's trying to be famous? Why do you think people try to sell it as
like an authenticity?
High art. Yeah.
High art. I don't know. I think it's different for a lot of people. I'm sure there's some Freudian sociology that we could like dive into. It's like, no, this is why people do this. And I think it's different for everybody. I think that it's easy to watch people respect high art. Everything comes with a process too. Even something that you consider formulaic probably has a great studio story.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we were doing this and then we decided to play it this way. And then they feel artsy.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything is just looping a beat, playing some guitar over it and singing.
Right.
It's like there is intricate creation, and there's no shade on most people that make music that way from me. They are working.
Right.
Like it is hard to take a song that you think is a piece of shit and layer guitars right and stuff to do a thing.
Yeah.
It's not a Beatles song.
Yeah.
It's not, James Taylor. Like, you're not going to get Graceland out of that. Like, there's all these things that are just inspired. I think especially as like two musicians who have played for a bunch of country artists in Nashville, like, we are prone to be thinking about country in that way. And
right.
I'm suggesting all these examples from outside of that. And
downtown, I think, is an interesting example too. The way that downtown has changed over the time that I've lived here. There are so many more musicians working downtown than when you and I were down there.
Well, so many more opportunities.
Every bar has two more floors than when we were down there. And the music has changed too. It's not as much country. It's more like wedding band, kind of like party dance music.
Changed.
I see my friends who are still down there making so much more money than I ever did when I was down there. And I'm happy for them and I'm excited about that.
I agree.
You can't tell the same story about Broadway. When I was playing after Shelly passed and I was still doing her Thursday 2 to 6 with Karen D's band, I felt like we were really making music. Like we were really jamming and creating. And I don't know that those opportunities exist as much downtown anymore.
They don't exist. You've got to play in the morning or afternoon, midweek to do things like that.
Right.
I just stopped doing a 2 to 6 p.m. gig at Legends on Tuesdays that I felt, but we were playing a bunch of like Linda Ronstadt and some Susan Tedeschi and things like that.
That's
and
awesome.
In the way that you were just saying, I don't give a shit about playing the record parts. But there's also, it has to be a full band thing too. Like, everybody has to be committed to saying, we're going to do the things that are important so that everybody knows what song it is. And then there's wiggle room.
Right.
And if you can have a whole band dedicated to that, you can do that. You can really make music.
Yeah.
But, there are so few bands downtown now that have regular lineups.
Yeah.
It's a lot of going through your phone and assembling a band for people who front. I know a lot of people do keep schedules, but it's hard to say that like on this shift, this day, it's always going to be these 5 people.
Right.
Because you have to build into that.
Right.
And that is the reason why there is such a culture on Broadway of, well, that's not how it goes. Because if you're not going to rehearse, if it's going to be different people, you have to do things in a predictable way. It's also the reason why for every great Dwight Yoakam song that's out there, the only one that gets played is Guitars Cadillacs.
Yeah.
Because it's 2 chords. It doesn't take a lot to pull that song off. And I think that is true throughout the catalog of what becomes standards.
Right.
On Broadway is that.
Even within songs, like there are so many songs that have fades on the record that have, quote, Broadway endings.
Yep.
And like that's your responsibility as a player is to get to know that.
Yeah, I just played a rehearsal yesterday for some dates I'm about to do, and a couple of the gigs on this run are routing gigs that require that band to play some more covers. And so, lucky for me, everything that got added are things that I've played 8 million times. And so I was saying to Amanda yesterday when I got home from rehearsal, I try not to be this is the way the ending goes because it is the Broadway ending. There is, to me, a nice opportunity to be like, oh, we'll see what happens. Let's see what we come up with that might be like a little different because it's a reliably good band and all that.
Yeah.
But also if there was conjecture, I'd be like, well, the way we normally get out of this is this, and
Exactly.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not often that you run into an ending that doesn't make a lot of sense.
One time I did, very funny, I interviewed my dear friend Mandy Schuker for the Shelly podcast.
I love Mandy.
And one of the funniest things that has happened to me downtown is we were playing a gig and there was an ending that we weren't sure about. And everybody did it a little different. Like one person pushed, one person didn't
What song
push.
is it, Tina?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
One person pushed, one person didn't, one person slowed down, and it was chaos. And at the end of it, Mandy just said, "It's okay, everybody do your own thing." And I just thought that was such a funny approach or such a funny assessment of that failure.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody did their own thing.
It's also a very Mandy thing to say.
Oh, she was so funny. So many things that she said in the podcast made me laugh, but my favorite is when she talked about Shelly singing the song Chicken Fried, and she said that Shelly would say instead of see the love in my woman's eyes, she would say see the love in my dad's eyes. And Shelly said, see the love. Why don't you say see the love in my man's eyes or love in my lover's eyes? I mean, why dad?
Yeah.
That's just that. Why dad?
I wonder if she thought, because I did think about this while I was listening to that. I wonder if it kind of thematically goes with the next line is feel the touch of a precious child.
Oh.
Which is also a weird lyric in general.
That's a great point. I never thought about it, but now I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's just a little weird, like a little weird line, but it thematically fits with being like, see the love in my dad's eyes, a child, like.
And the next line is mother.
Yeah, it feels very like generational, but you're right. That is like a thing.
See the love in my dad's eyes.
I wish I could recall any, because that is such a thing in the podcast is talking about like Shelly's lyric.
One of them that was my
things.
favorite that didn't make it into the podcast was I was playing with Shelly once at Layla's, and she sang the first verse of Devil Went Down to Georgia, immediately followed by the last verse of Devil Went Down to Georgia, which if you're familiar with Devil Went Down to Georgia, as I know you are, that eliminates the whole plot.
Yeah.
So she said like, devil jumped on a hickory stump and said, boy, let me tell you what. The devil bowed his head because he knew that he'd been beat. And we're all looking around like, like, are we going to do the fiddle solo, the guitar solo, the whole bit with the devil and the flames? And we just didn't. We got to the end of that verse and we were like, down. Just like looking around.
Sometimes you just gotta.
So the world's shortest version of Devil Went Down to Georgia. That stuff happened all the time.
Yeah.
There was also one other time that she said, devil jumped on a hickory stump and said, get on, boy. That's really good. I swear, I could do this all day, and I'm sorry I won't.
No,
but
it's fine.
One other one that I didn't.
I want people to be compelled to go listen to the podcast.
Okay, because this is these are not even in
there.
there.
But that's the thing. Well, I love that because then this will make a nice companion piece.
Yes.
You can direct people to this podcast as like, if you want to hear.
Exactly. Cross-pollination. One that she said in the song Toes by Zac Brown Band, the outro kind of breaks down and there's a spoken bit where the singer says, gonna drive out to the lake. And I just so clearly remember this was when the Full Moon Saloon had just gone non-smoking. And Chris, who was playing
Which took forever.
drums, yes, it was on the smoking side of the street. Chris, who was playing drums with Shelly at the time, would set up his drums on the corner of the stage so that he could lean out the door and smoke out the door. Anyway, we got to that breakdown section and Chris just goes with the kick, boom, 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 boom. And Shelly's not coming in, and so we're just still like doing this on
the little vampy
on the 5 chord, just like waiting for Shelly. And she just gets this glint in her eyes and she goes, "To the lake." and pointed like that. And it was so, I mean, we all just fell out laughing because it was so sudden.
This brings up, there's something I don't want to forget, but since we're talking about that right now, in talking about what the ceiling potentially for Shelly would be in music, I do wonder if the amount of lyric stuff that happened would have been problematic to her, like having like a touring schedule. Like if she were, let's not even dream big and say that she would headline a summer Shed tour, right? She was, let's give her a direct support spot. That's still 12, 13,000 people seeing 60 shows of you a year. And what would it be like if it's like, oh, Shelly Bush is good, but she's the one that fucks up the lyrics a lot?
Well, I would like to think that in that situation, she would be doing like at most 60 minutes of music.
You're right. That's 100% right.
And I mean, you know this from Broadway too. Like you get asked to play stuff that you've like never played before. I mean, the vast majority of it you have, but then once in a while, that may be true. Like that may even come up with that limited of a selection of music. But you're right. It is the type of quirk that you can get away with downtown. You can't get away in other contexts.
Yeah. I thought about this in all the lyric stories in the podcast, that I have told artists a lot who get mad about like blowing a lyric or something like that. People love that. Every time someone messes up a lyric, what does the crowd do? The crowd never boos. Right. They clap, because like it's a million things. It's singular. That's an experience that happened to you or to the artist and you and the people that are there. It won't happen again. Right. You know, like they're not going to mess up that lyric again. It makes you human. Like there are all these things. Like it always only makes people have a better time. No one ever gets booed off the stage for just like forgetting a verse, you know, even on like a big show. Yeah. So that's the thing, especially like in her way of trying to always be on, you know, and to the best degree of flawless that she could execute is like, again, goes back to that vulnerability thing that like, I wonder if she could have pulled that off.
Yeah. And I don't think it was Shelly's thing to do. I don't think that she wanted that for herself. I don't think she wanted to lean into anything that could have been seen as a vulnerability. Yeah. And so that's fine. If that's the choice that she made, that's great. Yeah. It's her life to do that. Yeah. But it does, knowing her story so intimately now, it does make me want to lean into the things about myself that are different. Yeah. Rather than acting like they're not there. Yeah. And I see the value in that. Maybe there's a value in that for me that Shelly didn't have access to because it was a different time. And maybe I'm able to do that because Shelly pushed that door open for me.
Yeah. So what was the process like for you for doing a sort of investigative podcast?
It started with me interviewing her longtime friend and one-time boyfriend, Rod Jansen. Because when I started with this project, I thought it was going to be an oral history project about Shelly. And I would basically make a website and have all of these interviews available, have transcripts and media and anything I could find about her. And I realized that I am not an oral historian. And although part of the reason that my heart is in this project is because I am committed to correcting the historical record about Shelly and about people like Shelly. Correcting it about Shelly because I believe that Shelly was a success, even if Shelly didn't believe that she was a success.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's we could be here for a Ken Burns length documentary talking about what success is. But yeah, I think you're right.
You saying that, it's also correcting the record about what success means in general. Like how do you see yourself as a success or not? So even though my mission in it is historical, I realized that my skill set was more in the storytelling of it. And also that it made it a more compelling story to hear it from someone who was there, myself, rather than when I realized that it had to be a podcast in order for people to pay attention and for it to be interesting. I started almost not having me in it. The amount that I was in it was just introducing the speakers. And I showed it to my friend / this creative mentor guy that I bounce ideas off of all the time. And he was basically like, this is nice, but this doesn't flow the way that it would flow if you were the narrator.
Yeah.
And so I learned that I had to insert myself into the story. I learned that it doesn't necessarily dilute that it's about Shelly, even though I'm in it, which was my worry, that if I was too in it, that no one would see Shelly. I also learned that sometimes people are not that good at telling stories.
Yeah.
Like they may have a really good point to make, but they take a long time to get there. And when you
or not enough,
somebody like that might have something great to say, and they might say a nugget of it.
Yeah.
But what I learned is that in order for them to shine, I had to just let them have the punchline.
Yeah.
I could set it up and just let them say the nugget that they are able to say. In a way, I'm just thinking about this now that I'm sitting here with another side person talking about it. But in a way, it's like supporting an artist.
Yeah.
I felt that every one of the people that I interviewed was like the artist. And how do I make them shine the best?
Yeah.
And that also meant that I had to, sometimes somebody would say something about another person and it had the potential to hurt their feelings. And I had to think about, well, how do I present this information? How do I present the truth that's in this statement without saying she got hired just because she had boobs?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was complicated, and I don't want to do it again.
Sure.
Once I get this out the door, we're done.
I mean, you say that, but I think it's like, a lot of my favorite artists out in the world, and again, none of them are country artists.
Mm-hmm.
I love artists that every time they put out a record, they think they're done. Fiona Apple feels that way.
Interesting.
Adele feels that way. That like, it always seems as though when they put a record out, it is like what they have. They drain the tank to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, some time goes on, some life gets lived, and you kind of ponder something out and it becomes the next thing. I would be willing to bet that in like a year, 2 years, you might feel differently about the notion of.
Yeah. Good luck to anybody that I play music with. You might have a podcast made about you. But that's interesting because it's almost like expending gives you the brain space to create something new.
Yeah. I very much believe in brain space to allow things in.
Yeah.
I am on record numerous times as saying COVID is the best thing that ever happened to me musically because I, for the first time, stopped playing 8 shows a week when on the road and in town.
Yeah.
Like just grinding. And it's not like high school where you want to finish what you're doing and run home and play music. It becomes a thing where it's like, well, I have these things that I want to accomplish musically, but I've just spent all this time making music, whether I am autopiloting it or not.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to touch these because I just need the space to do something else. And then by like having to come to a screeching halt made me realize I don't want to grind like that. I want the work I do to be more meaningful all the time, and it will be a better quality, all those things. Like just everything will be better for not overloading.
I feel the exact same way about COVID in my life. And Shelly died in 2015.
Yeah.
She was going up until then. She was grinding. She loved grinding. It was who she was.
Yeah.
But,
it is defining of her.
Totally. Everybody knew that about Shelly.
Yeah.
But it makes me think, like you brought up the example, like what if she was a direct support for somebody?
Yeah.
Like, what if she was? Like, what if she slowed down? What kind of music would she make?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't think it would be too different, but I wonder, it's possible that it would have been. It just happened that she didn't have, I say this in a way that is going to minimize the amount of suffering that COVID caused, but she didn't have.
I thought that as well. Just saying that we were talking about like all these like joys of COVID.
Right.
I mean, same with Amanda, like her business would not exist if it weren't for COVID and just, I often talk about like the unemployment situation and stuff, but to not minimize people's suffering and their loss and things like that.
With that in mind, like Shelly didn't have the luxury that I had with COVID.
Yeah.
When her body told her to slow down, she got sick.
Yeah.
It just makes me, I do wonder what her life would have turned out like. I mean, I don't talk about this in the podcast because it didn't seem germane to the story, but she was talking at the end of her life, she was starting to look into going back to school. Her bachelor's degree was in criminal justice, and she always wanted to be a lawyer.
Yeah,
and
you
so,
do say that.
and so she was looking into what that would mean.
She would have been like an incredible public defender.
Oh my God.
Someone that needed to just be like up people's ass for her clients.
Yeah.
You know, like she would have been like truly incredible at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, but like just even that we're talking about it, like talk about leaning into your strengths. I mean, like her tenacity was who she was. And even though there were some aspects of her personality that she glossed over or didn't talk about in public, like that was what she loved about herself. And so that was what she amplified about herself. You know, like I might not be that tenacious.
Did you take Livingston Taylor's class at Berkeley?
I did. Yes.
Tenacity trumps talent every time.
I don't remember that.
He said that 1,000 times.
Wow.
I heard him say that.
Wow.
And I don't want to say that in saying that Shelly didn't have talent, because that is the opposite of what is true. I thought about this when listening to the podcast. You know, Broadway artists that go from like having a couple shifts a week to then they start doing like 10 gigs a week.
I can't say I've had that experience. So tell me what you mean.
I know some people, and like they're not people that I've necessarily played with, you know, in like that expansion, but people that go from being like, oh, I'm playing these 1 or 2 gigs a week for a year or so. And then they start getting, you know, they'll get a sub call over here at another bar. Then they'll get offered a gig there. And then all of a sudden they go from doing leading 2 gigs a week to 10 gigs a week. And I consistently think every time I see someone that I know and like do that, I go, you're going to do this for 8 months and your voice is going to be damaged forever. It is incredible to me that Shelly's voice never was affected by the amount of work that she did.
Yeah.
And that is something that is out of control beyond explanation.
I mean, you can even just, I'm sure you can explain the exhaustion after doing a triple.
Yeah.
And you don't.
I was thinking about that.
You can sing, but you're not like the person who's leading these shifts.
Right. And for clarity's sake, a triple is 3 4-hour gigs, most often back to back.
Right.
Just so people understand like what that is. And that's 12 hours of making music, whether it's with your hands, you know, all your limbs for drummers or your voice, you know.
You talking about what a triple is makes me think of another terrible thing, which is the split double, which is that you have a shift from 2 to 6 and then you have off from 6 to 10 and then you have to play from 10 to 2.
Not as bad as a split triple.
Not as bad as, I mean, the fact that there even is a split triple.
Yeah.
A quote that sticks with me from the podcast was when Layla said, if there were quadruples, she would have done them.
Yeah.
And she would have.
I know people who have done quads.
And she would, well, right. It's not a terribly common thing.
No,
though.
It's not. It's psychotic every time. I've never done it.
Yeah.
And
it's psychotic.
But every time I hear someone say I'm doing a quad or I go, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, a triple, the times that I did triples, I needed a day after to recover.
Yeah, same.
You do literally just run to the next bar, or my triple that I sometimes did was full moon 2 to 6 on Thursday, Layla's 6 to 10, and then the stage 10 to 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so you eat lunch before that, you play the full moon shift, you make $45.
Yeah.
Or you walk across the street with all your gear and you buy a hot dog from the nice man in front of Layla's, and then you play the shift at Layla's, and you know, a lot of people are drinking down there. You might be drunk. And then you go to the 10 to 2. And it's like that's a lot out of your body to ask of one hot dog.
Yeah.
You know, like it's hard. That's hard work. And that's for you and me. All we're doing is holding a guitar on our backs.
Yeah. My fingers might hurt more than usual the next day, but that's not.
But it's not your body.
That's right.
It's not your body. And for people like Shelly, her body is her instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't.
Yeah. So the fact that I never heard her sound bad, you know, in terms of like vocal quality, and nobody, you know, quoted in the podcast that did many of those one-day adventures with her, the whole things, would probably say anything.
Even up to her literal last gig, which she was so sick
Yeah,
that
that was-
Layla sent her home.
Yeah.
Aaron Holloman was playing bass on that gig, and Aaron said she could still sing "Oh My God, Shelly's
Yeah.
voice." And so, and the same thing when she did her last road gig, which was the Fremont Street Experience in Vegas, and she still put on the show.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing wrong with the show.
Right.
There
Yeah.
was something wrong with Shelly, but there wasn't
Yeah.
anything wrong with the music.
Yeah.
You know,
How long did it take you to do the podcast?
5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I started in 2020 with Rod.
Wow.
But also, I wasn't getting paid to do this.
Of
So
course,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
like it was a little here and there where I can.
Yeah, but that's longer than I was expecting.
Oh, really?
I would have thought you would have said like 2 to at most 3 years.
I mean, I'm sure there were periods, like months-long periods, where I didn't pay any attention
Yeah.
to it.
Mm.
Maybe even a year in there
Yeah,
where
sure.
it fell off the map.
What was the writing process of the narrative part like?
Painful, drawn
Yeah.
out.
Because it's very good. Like I want to point out that
Thanks.
like that is the quality of the writing for your narration of the podcast struck me as, not that I didn't think that you were capable as someone who I've, known for a long time, but I was just like, this is very, very good. And so I was curious like what that.
Well, I think I can take only minimal credit for that because I have a friend named Karen Pittleman who is an incredible writing coach. That's her day job is that she's a writing coach.
That's cool.
I did not know that. She's somebody that I know from music.
Yeah.
She has a band called Karen and the Sorrows. She's amazing. She's one of the smartest people that I've ever met in my entire life. She's a nerd about country music and country music history.
Mhm.
She's a nerd about inclusion. She's a nerd
cool.
about making sure that untold stories get told
Yeah.
in country music. She has an incredible Medium article called, I think it's called Another Country. It's very, very good. Highly recommend it. Anyway, I was talking to her about this, just ideating, just being like,
Yeah.
I'm doing this thing. Like, I wonder how I can talk about the machine of country music as it relates to Shelly, even though she didn't really intersect with it, even though she only ever got turned down by it. And she
Yeah.
had all these great ideas. And then she reveals to me that she's a writing coach
Yeah.
and that she wants to read the whole transcript and help me work through it. And so she very selflessly gave me her time and helped me sort out how I was going to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear you say that that you think it's good, because sometimes I worry. Sometimes I think it might not be. Like when I listen to it, I've listened to it so many times, it starts to feel just like a collection of stories to me.
Yeah.
But it's nice to hear that you think it has narrative structure.
Well, no, I mean, and like I said, you do that thing, especially talking about, Shelly's disabilities and things like that. And like I said, I even have a note here on my phone. Let's see where it is. This note says, writing is great. I knew about Shelly's walk and tics, and I wasn't sure if that would make it in parentheses, it's not defining, like it didn't, like those are the things, that's what I was trying to say. Like it didn't define her, but they weren't. And I said, but it happens at exactly the right time. Great reveal, serial like.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment.
So whether or not it's narrative, like, but it's built like a series, that's the other thing is you could have made 1 3-hour podcast too.
Oh yeah.
And the idea of having chunks, like the chunks work right.
Yeah. The chunks happen kind of naturally.
Yeah.
The chunks
I
happen
would
kind of
imagine,
naturally. Like I didn't necessarily want to just tell the chronology of Shelly's life. Also because I wasn't there for the chronology of Shelly's life. It was really hard
and it's also
for me.
kind of obscured.
Yeah.
This would be something interesting to know about Shelly. Like, how did she learn to hide those things? You do such a great job through the podcast of bringing as much as you could mine of the real Shelly to life.
Yeah.
And for people that only ever played with her, knew her from downtown, like I bet if you got 100 people that played downtown at the time when she was around all the time, when she was the queen of Broadway, how many of them would learn so much about her? And it's not even like touching like the whole story because of how guarded like she was. But
yeah.
But I wonder where and when she learned to do that. But more so in terms of something like age and things like that. Like, how did she learn that age is so bad? Especially when she kind of got started later anyway, from like the time that she stopped working at the post office at the same time. Like
right.
she was a real adult by then.
Right. It's not like she moved to town when she was 18.
Right. Yeah.
This is some speculation on my part,
Sure.
but I don't talk about a lot of the meetings that she had with labels and publishers and things, because they all were the same story, which is that she had the tenacity to get these meetings and then she was told no.
Yeah.
I have to believe that had something to do with it.
Sure. I would be interested to know when
Yeah.
that became a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I didn't ask the question in the right way. Like, not like, how did she learn? That is how she learned. But like, I wonder at what point it became important to her to maybe activate that mechanism that she was using about her appearance. Because I mean, you know, she was so big on clothing and looks, like that was such a major part of her. You talk about her estate sale at the end and that there were 3,000 plus.
That was just the clothes.
Yeah.
The clothes were 3,000 plus items. I mean, when I think about how many items of clothing I have, genuinely, I have, and I know that I'm like maybe a little more minimal than the average bear, but I think I have 5 pairs of pants, maybe 6 with dress pants, 7 tops.
Same. Yeah.
And that's a lot less than 3,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was relentlessly focused on her image.
Yeah. And so I bet all those things about how she was physically presenting herself in all the ways, you know, was a mechanism that she was using to say, okay, well then let me control my narrative.
I mean, that there was a period in Shelly's life between leaving her hometown of Stover, Missouri, and leaving her job at the post office and working in the honky-tonks full time. That period that was likely the late 90s, I don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just, again, like this story is unfortunately.
Shelly Bush has very lost years of Jesus kind of. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Jesus, the missing years.
Yeah.
That's right. And she had like a Rumspringa. I had to get that information mostly secondhand. I got it from her best friend from high school who was still talking to her a lot. I got it from Rod Jansen had firsthand information there, her longtime friend and one-time boyfriend, because they were dating at that time.
You are implying this, but let me like directly ask it.
Yeah.
Did he give you the impression that she was open with him
about
her, just who she really was? And
that's a good question.
Let me, but let me tie that in, like, because this is the last thing I have here. Like, I wanted to ask, was Shelly ever interested in your personal life, and not like dating or like whatever, but like as in like how your life was?
Yes, she was more interested in her own life, but who among us isn't? She was a good friend.
Cool.
When especially with the people that she was closest to.
Yeah.
People like Dawn Ritchie and Karen D.
Yep.
Those were her best friends, and she, you know, they fought sometimes, like friends
you talk about Karen saying that at her memorial.
We fought like cats and dogs because they really did. Like, I mean, she would. It was just funny. Like Karen would scream at her from the back of the van.
You should do a podcast about Karen.
Karen, dude.
Is such a character. And I don't know, another person I don't know well at all, mostly because she was playing drums a lot, but you talk to so many bass players, and bass players are always the people I don't know because we're never in the same room at the same time.
I didn't even think about that, but you're so right. It's almost all bass players.
Yeah.
What the hell's up with that? Beth also told me that I should do something about Karen, and she is singular, and I'm going to have a release show for the podcast on March 6th at Analog, and I'm going to interview Karen for a live bonus episode.
That's awesome. I love that.
Because she is so funny. She's so smart.
Yeah.
You know, she's an amazing musician.
Yeah.
When I play Ellen shows once every 5 years and then run out of gas and never do it again, she's who I want to play drums, because I love playing music with her. One of the funniest things that I think she said in the podcast was that girl could do some of the most mind-boggling, excruciatingly mentally painful things. Like, but that's how she felt about Shelly, but they were also best friends.
That's good to hear. I mean, because I ask and don't freak out about this. Like,
no.
That is not a thing that like comes across in the, like it. I was compelled to ask because like I did not get the impression from it how Shelly, especially because it is so clear of how focused she was for herself, that you could easily be forgiven to thinking, and again, to say that she had a band full of women who she wasn't necessarily trying to empower, yada, yada, like that she could have been not a bad person, but like didn't really give a shit.
Totally.
And so that's good to hear.
But Matt, she was a good person. At the same time, I'm telling you about one of her best friends, Karen D, who she excluded from press photos because Karen has a masculine presentation.
Yeah.
So she's a good friend, but that doesn't mean that she didn't mess up.
Right, of course. I mean, who among us does not?
Right.
I mean, that is a universal truth.
Yeah.
We live in a time where, well, nowadays there's a whole big fucking swath of people who don't want to acknowledge people's flaws again.
Right.
Like, we went through a nice period there where it was okay to have discussions about how everybody is flawed and, so everybody has it.
I mean, that makes me think, Matt, that Shelly could not have existed at any other time than the time that she existed.
Yeah.
Shelly passed away before the political polarization of this country became common knowledge to everyone in it.
Yeah.
And now when I look at the people that were around Shelly and her band, when I see their interactions with each other on Facebook, they clearly still love each other very much. They clearly still have this shared experience, but many of them have diametrically opposed views on fundamental
ideological
things. And it just makes me think that there is no other time in history that Shelly could have had the personalities around her that she had.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially because we started a while ago by me saying that musically she was either 10 years too early or 10 years too late to have an impact with the kind of music that she was trying to make.
Right. Yeah.
So it is interesting that that as a person that you think that it had to that it was right.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, musically she missed the boat on the girl thing.
Yeah.
But also that's just scenes in general. We're talking about that with Broadway. Like our experience playing downtown couldn't have happened at any other time,
right. Yeah.
The experience of making music with a band.
Yeah.
And now we have to try to find those things in other areas, and that scene is going to turn over, and there's going to be magic that's happening on Broadway right now that I don't know about.
Yeah.
And that's great. And I hope they all have a lovely time.
Yeah.
It makes me less romantic about the past.
Sure.
Knowing that it wouldn't have existed. What really brought it home for me was I played at Mellow Mushroom with Beth Garner. Mellow Mushroom is what the Full Moon Saloon is now, a Mellow Mushroom.
Yeah. When was this?
It was at least 2 years ago.
Because I can't even tell you the last time that I saw Beth around.
Yeah, she's doing a lot. She plays with Janelle Means. And she does some Acme stuff.
Cool.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, had no idea.
Yeah,
she's one of those people that, for as fucking incredible of a musician as she is, is just someone that I don't see around from that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how much of that stuff has moved out to the Opry land adjacent scene, like the Nashville Palace and Scoreboard and all that. It's much easier to do what used to happen out there than it is to do it on Broadway.
It's funny that you say that because one of the interviews that I was so lucky to get was with one of Shelly's old drummers, Amy Ackland, who no longer lives in Tennessee. I'd forgotten all about Amy Ackland until there were 4 or 5 people that whose names I was like, holy shit. Yeah, they're still
that's
around.
Right. And then think about Beth, someone who I think about Beth a bunch, because she was so good. And it's someone you just don't see around anymore.
Yeah.
But there were some people like Amy Ackland. I was like,
Amy was in town and I had somewhere to be, but I went to the Outback Steakhouse and went to say hello, and we ended up all hanging out at Music City Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
And I was hanging out there with Karen D and Amy and one of the bartenders from the Full Moon, Emily Peck, and got all this incredible tape. And it's oh, that's where the scene is.
Yeah.
It got older and it got on Briley and now it's out there.
Yep. Which, if in talking about them, I'm just looking at these notes because we'll pivot to some things about you in general after just a little briefy guy.
I guess I forgot.
But there is just so much joy in everybody recounting all the stories. Even the things about, you saying about Karen and about Paul Joe Taylor, about them getting sort of at least aesthetically pushed out at different times. But in their recounting, they do it all with such joy. everybody does.
Hmm.
I use them because they are two people that you point out as having been specifically wronged per se at some point in the process, and that they still do it, but that everybody only has joy in talking about Shelly.
Some of that is in the edit.
Sure. It can always be.
But you're detecting something that was pervasive. And I think talk about things happening at the right time. If I had done this just after Shelly passed, I don't know that would have been the same.
Yeah.
The fact that I did it 10 years meant that everybody has a lot of nostalgia for that time too.
Yeah. Shelly herself and the scene. I have another note in here that says like female artists on Broadway now wish that they were as on the hustle as Shelly was.
Wow.
That even the ones that like think that they're killing it, and that's not to say that they're not, but compared to Shelly,
right?
Like they don't know anything about like hustling.
Well,
quite
and
that hard.
That just,
in my opinion,
that makes me even more fired up about telling people about Shelly's story, because that is there is no metric for that type of achievement. There is no award that Shelly's going to get from the Grammys about that. And it's valid and it's a success. She should be recognized for that.
Yeah.
Just like you should be recognized for your charts.
Yeah, sure.
Like that's real life. That's real musicians.
True.
The airbrushed, people on nobody's on salary anymore.
Nope.
The uppermost echelons, maybe 10 acts. I mean, or what is that? What do you think? Is it 20 acts? 10, but it's less than 20, I would say.
That still have
acts
salary
that have
gigs?
people on salary.
Yeah, that feels right.
I'm just guessing.
It's decreasing.
It's
all
decreasing.
The time. There are, and even if people are going on to salary on gigs, it's not sustainable money either way.
Right.
It's more of a like right of first refusal NDA.
Right.
For the artist than it is a financial security for the player.
Right.
Now, I was not on salary with Sarah Evans, but I was getting paid on a W-2. I was a full-time employee and was getting paid what could have been the kind of thing that is a salary now. And my financial contribution still meant nothing to buying this house.
Right.
I mean, that's in terms of like real life things. That's what you want. You want to not be 1099. Be having a W-2 is like, oh, cool.
Yes.
People in finance will see that I am a W-2 employee.
Yeah.
And that will make a difference. It will make some sort of difference. And it's just funny that in like that case, it did not. And that is what is happening with people who are quote unquote salaried now.
Right. Totally different thing. And I just think that is the story of working musicians in Nashville. It's the things that happen before you get on salary. Or if you ever do get on salary.
Yeah. Or you just get a good show pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough. In terms of you having a very constructed podcast, again, it's not grass is always greener. It's about balance and like both things being true at the same time. I prep for these podcasts often. Very infrequently am I thinking, oh, I left something out. But sometimes the best stuff comes out of these rambling things that you'll like end up on something.
Yeah.
Would we have stumbled on the idea that Shelly could have only existed when she did, but she was also musically not? We probably would have never gotten that if it wasn't for the way that we're talking.
Totally. I did have a couple of terrible interviews at the beginning. Like I was trying to impose my prep, so to speak, on Rod and on Karen D. I already had the idea in my mind of what Shelly's story was going to be, and I realized I had to let the story kind of reveal itself to me.
Which is funny because those are the people who probably, that is the most detrimental to try and do that to, because they are two people who were closest in that way of like of us not knowing like whether Rod, like how much she let him see as a personal person. And it probably, I would bet, if I had to put money on it, I bet it would be a lot. But also given the amount of guarding, like it wouldn't be shocking if that answer was not.
Yeah. Yes. And that's why I had to interview them both twice. Because I needed to let them tell their story. I was trying to get Shelly's story out of them.
Yeah.
And what I needed to do was get their story with Shelly in it.
Yeah.
And that allowed them to be honest about Well, not that I think anybody was being dishonest,
Sure.
but it gave
Do
them.
you think her parents were honest?
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. I only spoke to her mom because her dad died.
Sure, yeah, right.
But,
Sorry.
but
You talk about her dad in such a way that I had forgotten already that he is not in it
Yeah.
because his contributions, as it were,
yeah,
are so clear and well defined in the podcast. That's like, oh yeah, that's right.
yeah. I think Shirley. I mean, some of the conversations that I had with Shirley were so extraordinarily moving about talking about like losing your only kid.
Yeah.
You know, I don't. It's a tragedy when any parent outlives their children,
Right.
and I was grateful that she was honest, but it did take some. You know, everybody that I talked to for this podcast is somebody that I know personally.
Yeah.
And I had the hardest time getting in touch with the people that I didn't know personally.
Mhm.
It was hard for me, and it took several tries for me to really connect with Shirley.
Mhm.
Now we talk every week. But
that's great.
when we first started talking, she thought I was Myrna. You know?
Yeah, that's in there. Yeah.
And so it's like, she didn't know me. I had to win her trust.
Yeah.
And show her that I was trying to cherish Shelley's legacy.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know, do
I
anything
think that's a common
nefarious.
tale. You know, I listen to enough podcasts and things with people who are writing books and stuff, and they find that to be true. Like that sometimes getting to the like real inner sanctum of personality. Also, we've been talking about, and I've said it a couple times, the thing about like whether Shelley was like deeply honest about herself with Rod. I don't think Rod would still visit her mom,
Right.
and in the same way if that weren't true.
Yeah.
I think that's an indicative point that answers the question without
Yeah.
having to think about it any further.
He's also just like an angel of a person, which is
I've only met Rod a couple times
Really?
in passing long ago. Probably when I first started playing in town.
the first time I interviewed him was on Zoom. The second time was at his house, and he pulled up a file that he had made for me that had all sorts of photos of Shelley,
Wow.
a bunch of her albums, and I ran out to a Walgreens and bought a flash drive and came out, and he just put it all on there for
Yeah.
me. So he cared a lot about Shelley, not just as a former romantic partner, but as a friend.
Yeah, of course.
He cares about her family, and he cares about her legacy too.
Yeah. It's also I think this is one of these good nuggets for people who will listen to this at any time, that it's real bullshit to think that romantic partners are only supposed to be that thing.
Yeah.
You know, like whether or not it ends and stuff like that. That if something really bad happens, like then it's good to cut people out. But I think that there are so many instances in which like just because something didn't work out doesn't mean that like those people don't have value in your life.
It takes some maturity to get to that
Yeah.
point. I think about that too with Garnet, Shelley's like business
Yeah.
partner and primary benefactor at the end of her life. You know, they weren't romantically involved,
Right.
but there was speculation, but they just had a really close relationship. And it's like, you don't have to have a romantic partnership with someone to be really, really close to them.
That's right. It's so funny you say that because like I didn't know anything about that. Like in my experience, the show, like the Garnet thing, like was not even on my radar.
Yeah.
So that was news.
He wasn't as much of a presence downtown with Shelley as he was on the road with her.
Sure. Yeah. So that was a whole like new information to me thing. Again, like for a few minutes in listening to the podcast, it's like, oh, is he? Like, is that a thing that we're going to find out? That
Yeah.
like that, and it would be interesting if it was. And obviously, you want the truth, but it's like in that moment where like you are presenting it with a little bit of uncertainty until you get to reveal that that is not a thing.
Yeah. There was
That's
just
like a good.
there
Yeah.
just was no evidence for it.
Yeah, of course.
And so I mean, and there
That
are
is more a note about like your writing of it.
yeah.
Which again, I wanted to say before, and I would be remiss to not say it. And you were talking about your friend who did a lot of the editing. For you.
Well, I wouldn't.
Oh.
I wouldn't say she did a lot of the editing, but she gave me some
Guidance.
critiques that were so valuable. It would not be the same
Sure.
without her.
I have been around and not participated in some like high level seminars about people trying to write like business books and things like that. And in the course of it, there will always be like a presentation of like a publisher. There's so many things, and it happens in records too. The parts that you don't think about that are crucial to getting something out the door. And like in books, it's like typeset. You know, like no one thinks about using font and typeset to create a book and get it out. And people who do editing, that when you read someone's book, if it's done well, you just think, oh, this person just did this.
Right.
like that they didn't have 10 different drafts of it before it became the thing.
Yes.
So it is good for us to herald people that helped make that a better thing.
I did 5 complete rewrites of the transcript.
Wow.
And it was exhausting.
Sure. Yeah.
It was exhausting. It was so much copy and pasting, and it was hard to work through, but I think it's better for it.
Yeah, great. I liked that you got an Aeneid reference.
Oh, thanks. Well, it was so funny because it's like
what a nerdy.
She got it. Shelly got a no, and so she just sent somebody dressed up instead. And I was like, oh, it's an actual Trojan horse. Okay.
I think the podcast is an incredible accomplishment for you. I think it's an incredible legacy for Shelly, someone who it's been 10 years since she's gone, and that she was doing it right up till the end.
Yeah.
It's not as though that's the other thing as well, is like her life and career came to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
Like very suddenly. It wasn't as though she got sick and fought for 3 years through cancer and wasn't able to play, and there's like a 3-year gap, because I've known other people like that where like they have to go away because of illness for a long time, and then when they pass, there's been time. It's like it all happened kind of at once.
Yeah,
in the grand scheme of things.
She didn't fade into obscurity. She like evaporated in a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because it makes me see her story differently.
Yeah.
Like she didn't decline.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, she did, but it was like instantaneous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah, we could like very spiritually and existentially speculate on many things about that.
Yeah.
But this is not the
right.
The place.
Right. No, that's my
or the validity. Yeah.
Rank speculation is my next podcast. This is mostly based on people's real experiences.
I love that. Well, thanks for being here. I'm glad we could talk about
Matt.
this.
I'm so glad to know you.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
All right. Thanks to Ellen for coming on the show and talking about Shelly and Girl in a Hurry. Thanks so much to you for hanging out, having a listen, sticking around. I'm very grateful for it. If you like what you've been hearing, please head to whatever podcasting platforms and consider rating the show and reviewing it. That is sort of the missing linchpin for me so far, if I'm being honest. Not a lot of ratings and reviews, and having more of those would be very helpful when I am talking to people about how to spin the podcast out and make some things happen. So much appreciated. Be sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends. Sharing with friends is always a great way to go. You can find the show on Instagram at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. I am on Instagram at Matt O'Donnell. I am on Blue Sky as at Matt O'Donnell, and that covers both. I didn't want to do double over there. If you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever, send those along to matto'donnellwantstoKnow@gmail.com. I am still giving away stickers. Just send an email with your address. You don't even have to send postage, and I'll just get one out to you. Let's have them out in the world. That's going to do it for this time. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya.
fun as shit.
Cool. That's what I like to hear.